In this video, I will briefly explain what HDR toning is, how to do it using multiple images, but also how to use just one single image and sort of create the same effects. So technically, HDR is high dynamic range photography. So what you would do is you would actually take multiple images of the same subject at different exposures. So maybe somewhere around here, one of these two images is quote unquote properly exposed, but you would also take images that were overexposed as well as underexposed. And then you actually merge these in Photoshop. So right now I have 8 images here. I'm actually not going to use all of them. You need at least 3 to do this. So I'm going to just hit on these 3, 1, 4, and 7, and open those up in Photoshop. Okay, and the idea is you can go from looking like this, which is kind of flat, the sky is kind of boring and washed out, to something that looks more like this. Okay, so this is a really neat trick to do with your panoramas. So I have these 3 images open here. Okay, I closed the other one, so it's just these images open. So if you were to do this in real life, this is how you would do it. You can go to File, Automate, and right above Photo Merge, which is where we use to make our panoramas, is Merge to Hdr Pro. Okay, so what that's going to do is actually put all 3 of those images together into the same document, and then give you some creative controls to get the image to look the way you want it to. So you just click on Add Open Files and hit OK. Okay. And this wasn't shot with a tripod, so they're a little bit off, but Photoshop is going to align them for you, which is pretty cool, just like it does with the panorama shots. Okay. And it's thinking about it here. And now you get this merged HDR dialog box, and this is where you get to play with some different things. And I'm going to show you guys this later, but in more depth. But there's some presets that you can use that might look kind of neat. And these can be sort of starting points for you. So maybe you like the way one of them looks, and then you want to play around with it a little bit more. So I'm just going to pick one. And then you can adjust some of these things here. I'm going to increase the vibrance, make it a little bit brighter, and just hit OK. Okay, and that's the basic gist of the HDR toning. So you go from having these 3 different images, and it gives you a lot more information, and then Photoshop can turn it into something that looks like this. So I want you guys to try this with your panoramas. Okay, so I have this landscape panorama. This is just of the park. It's not that exciting, but here it is. So I obviously don't have, oops, sorry. I obviously don't have multiple exposures of this image because I didn't tell you guys to do that, but you can actually fake the look of an HDR tone photograph by clicking on Image, Adjustments, HDR Toning. Okay, so if you're going to do this, what I would recommend doing is you have your final landscape, let's say. I would recommend before you do it is go Save As, so that you know that it's not going to overlap in any way. I'm not sure what this computer's doing. It's very slow today, sorry. And just save it as Landscape Panorama HDR. Okay, that way you know that it's different and you're not making any destructive edits to your final. So I would put Landscape Panorama HDR, and you would want to save it as a Photoshop document. Okay, and then hit save. Okay, so I'm going to go to Image, Adjustments, HDR Toning. Okay, so now I get this dialog box, which was very similar to what we saw before. I'm going to zoom in a little bit on my image so I can see what's going on. So again, you have these presets, which are really good starting points. So experiment with what you like. You could also just leave it on default and start to play around with it. So you should leave method at local adaptation. It's pretty flexible, but you can try the other ones out. But I would just, for now, leave it at local adaptation. The edge glow basically refers to the glow coming off of the contrasting areas. And again, some images might work better than others for this. But typically we want to keep it not too crazy, you know. If it's too big of a glow, it might lose some detail. So I think, is this freezing? Here, let me do, okay. So you can see, you know, if I increase the glow, it's going to do weird things to your picture. So you want to find a place that looks good. All right. The strength is how it's the contrast of the glow. So obviously if it's stronger, you're going to have a brighter glow. Okay. You can do smooth edges. It's going to sort of help blend some of the glow together. So that's a good thing to check off. Gamma refers to the brightness of the midtones. Okay, so you can play around with that. See what looks good for you. Exposure refers to the brightness of the overall tone. You know, do you want it to be dark and moody? I don't know. Okay, so play around. And then details, obviously that just refers to details. You can soften it and lose some of the detail. So see what looks good for your image. Under advanced, shadows are your darker areas, so you can increase those. Brighten up highlights. Vibrance refers to amplifying the muted color. So any color that's sort of grayish, you could amplify to make them brighter. But that's different. See how now it's gray? It looks like desaturated, right? Like there's no color. Saturation refers to all of the colors. It'll amplify all of the colors. So you can see how it's slightly different where it affects everything in the image. Okay. You can also go down here and play around with some things and see if you get a look that you like. So this is our before image and then our preview of what we just did. So you can see how this really makes the colors pop and the highlights of the shadows pop. Okay, so this is something that's really cool to play with your panoramas. So I'm going to just go ahead and, well actually, you could also do monochromatic, like where it's black and white. It's up to you guys. I want you to play, be creative, and come up with a cool looking image. So I'll hit OK, and then that's my second version of my panorama. And what you can also do too, which you guys know how to do now, with masking and all of that fun stuff, is you could actually combine this into your original image and mask certain areas so certain things pop out more. So let's say you had a person in there and you want to do the HDR toning but just on the person. So let's say, let me open up the original. Oh, it's not going to find it. Okay, forget it. But you could you know, do some creative editing like that. It's the same as when we did the you know, having an image black and white, but having a little bit of color pop through. So it's about your layers. So that's very easy to do. So that is HDR toning. So if you were to do it in real life with 3 different images, you would end up with something that could look like this. And then you can also do it by going to image adjustments, HDR toning, and sort of fake it with just using a single image, where Photoshop kind of creates the look of an HDR image without you having to do all of that extra shooting and merging. So I would look up some images, look up HDR panoramas or HDR landscapes, and just get an idea about what they look like, and get your image to look really cool. It'll make your skies pop. It'll do a lot for your colors. Okay? And that about does it for HDR for your panoramas. Thanks for watching.